Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On Another Line. Today I'm going to show you guys how I pour my lead, jig heads, and a few other things today, my drop shot weights, and my shaky heads. I don't have any of the shaky head hooks right now. I have some on order at the tackle box. I'm going to pick them up here in a few days. So I'm just going to show you the basic technique of how it's done it. And then the last part of this video, I'm going to show you guys how I actually powder paint them. It's not that hard. It's fairly expensive to get in the game as far as the molds and stuff. Most molds are anywhere from $40 to $55 depending on what you're looking at. But the longevity of the thing, if you're planning on creating your baits for years and years to come, which I am for sure, it was a no-brainer for me to invest in it. First and foremost, I use tungsten a lot of time, especially if I'm talking about flipping and pitching weights or worm weights or whatever. You know, stuff like Ned heads and stuff, I prefer to pour my own because it saves me money in the long run, and plus it gives me an added benefit or added warm feeling, if you will, for catching something that I made. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you guys how I pour the baits. First and foremost, it's a nice day here in Ohio. Proceed with caution. Lead is very, very dangerous to work with. You know, it is what it is. You know the difference. You know the health concerns with lead. That's why I'm doing it outside. I never do it inside the garage. I always wait till a nice day, pour out here. The wind's blowing fairly decent today, so if you're hearing the wind on my mic, I apologize. But you definitely want a well-ventilated area when you do this. But it's really simple, and it gives you, something to look forward to in the wintertime to stock up on your heads and stuff. So let's get after it. Right here is what I have. I'm going to show you guys a little closer video here with this other small Canon camera here. I have two different types of Lee melting pots. This is my favorite. This is kind of like a foundry type deal where it has a lever here that you pull. It allows the lead to be dispensed in there. It's safer in my opinion. It allows just to pour the right amount in there. However, I do have the standard pour type or pot, the hot plate, if you will, the hot pot, that'll allow you can pour bigger weights more quickly and get a better pour. So let's take a look at what I have here. So I have a couple things, guys. I have an old spoon here. Keep in mind those things do get really, really hot. I have a little can of WD-40 here. That's for oiling the hinges. You do need to oil the hinges on these do-it molds fairly often. Matter of fact, if you look here on the hinge, it says oil hinge often. So inside here, we're going to be pouring my finesse head or the Ned heads. I have the wire bait keeper as well as 1,000 mustad hooks. Here are the, let's see if I can find so right here. Right here's the size that I like. I think I'm going to buy some 2/0s this year, but I do have 1,000 of these, so it's going to be something that it's going to take me a while to go through. And here, if you can see this hopefully, this is a line lock for a drop shot weight, which we're going to pour some of in a second also. So what I do is I get used tire balancing weights from a local tire shop in my area. It's basically the best way to source lead in my opinion in my area. You can buy virgin lead or remanufactured or refined lead different places, but it's fairly expensive. Again, I do have the hookup on some stuff around here. Go check your local tire shops. Usually they'll give it to you. Sometimes you just have to pay a slight amount for it. So the three jig sizes we're going to be, or the three mold sizes we're going to be using today this is the model MFJ 6A, which is a Midwest finesse jig, and this is the Ned Rig head that I was talking about. It goes from a 1/16 ounce all the way up to a 1/4 ounce, which is what I use all the time. And then we're going to look at, and I'll show you a better look at this stuff. We have a finesse drop shot, which is the model FDS 8A. And then we have the shaky head or the shake it jig. So this is a SRH 6M SLA. These are the three molds we're going to be looking at today. Again, we're not going to be pouring anything with the shaky head because I don't have any of the actual shaky head hooks that I use. I always use 5/0 or 4/0. I never go into 3/0. It just seems to work better for me. First thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to goes the lid there. You're going to want to practice some safety here. One, I'm wearing my solar bats here. They're not really safety glasses, but they're going to keep me from getting stuff in my eyes. Should I get a splash, it will just melt my solar bats, which is better than melting my eyes. But if you just have regular safety glasses, definitely wear those. Usually wear gloves. I don't anymore because it allows me to be more safe handling this hot stuff. Things get hot. Even this spoon here gets really, really hot, or what you have. So I drop the wheel weights down in there, and I actually will drag the slag, or basically just get it off the top. You don't want that stuff. It's just the impurities in the lead. The next thing you're going to do is, if you haven't already, you're going to take a candle, light the candle, and you're going to put the flame right inside the cavity of this, so you can actually create a sooty, more soot on there, and that will allow your mold and your actual what you're pouring to release a lot better and not get stuck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up my mold cavity with some lead here, and I'm just going to pour it in there. And again, I don't care what it looks like at this point. What I'm doing here is I'm just getting the mold cavity hot, because it will make a smoother casting if you do that. You want to get every mold that you're going to be using hot. I see a lot of people doing some things where they will lay the mold on top of the foundry here, or the melting pot, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second. They take the mold they're using, and as the pot is heating up, they'll make like an A-frame here, and it'll allow the actual mold to get hot a little more quickly. So again, I'm going to do this one more time, just so it heats the mold cavities up that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be pouring 1/8 ounce all the way up to 1/4 today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time pouring them right now. I'm just going to show you the basics of it, and I'm going to show you how it's done. That way this video is not an hour long. I'm just going to show you the basics of pouring these, and then the next part I'm going to show you the basics of powder painting them, and it's a very simple process. So let's see what we got here. Again, so these are the bait keepers that are for the finesse jig head here. I don't know if you can see this, hopefully you can. Very small, about 1,000 of them, I think, for about $20. So I'm gonna lay my mold out here, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my hook, and I'm going to put them in the mold. And again, I'm going to start on 1/8 ounce here. I like to put my hooks in first. I will tell you that this shaky head, or I'm sorry, this Ned Rig or the finesse jig head mold is, this is probably not going to be the one that you want to start with if you're just now learning how to pour these things, because it can get tricky to get everything in there. So I'm putting the hooks in on one side here. You can see right there on the back side of that hook, that's where the bait keeper goes. And it has a straight side and a crooked side. You can see this, the straight side is kind of, they're bent at a 90-degree angle from each other or away from each other. The straight side goes down into the head of the lure. Let me put one in there and I'll show you. Straight side down in the head of the lure. Notice that one was actually 180 degrees out from where it needs to be. Fell in there like that. Here's another one. Again, the more sharp bend point like this right here, the sharper bend goes not inside the head of the lure. That's what actually holds on to the bait. Once you do that, you're just going to close the mold on top of itself. Make sure you're being really, really careful here that the mold fits together very, very tightly, and there's no gaps in between the mold, because if you have gaps, that means that one of your, either a hook or your bait keeper is stuck in there the way it shouldn't be, and it's going to allow the lead to go down on there. So once you have that in there, again, you could do all 6 of these at one time. I usually don't use the smaller ones, so there's no need for me to waste the lead or anything. So I know that these last 4 are what I'm going to be using. Fill it up. It doesn't matter if it overflows, guys. That's called sprue, and you kind of want that. That way you know you're getting the mold cavities full. See that there's some sprue at the top there. It's not a big deal. Open it up. Do not grab these things with your fingers. They are hot, obviously. I think lead melts at about 700 degrees Fahrenheit, so these things are at least that hot. So I take these little old side cutters that I have, and I work these things out of the mold, and I set them aside on some wood or something to cool off. Do not try to grab these and pull the sprue off immediately, because they will melt the fire out of your fingers. Let's do one more round here. Again, these things right here are the most delicate molds that I own, but they are definitely worth it once you get this thing, get the hang of it. And you can knock out several hundred of them in an hour or so. Make sure the hook is down in there. Again, fold the side that doesn't have the hooks in it over. That way you don't have to worry about them shifting. I'm looking here, everything is mated up as it should be, and then we're going to pour them. You can put the head of the spout down in there. I'm leaving a little gap so you guys can see the lead going in there. Once that's done, it dries, or it cools very quickly. I'm going to take my side cutters here and I'm going to work them out of here. Got a little overflow here on my mold. Put that back in the melting pot. So here, let me grab one here that's fairly cooled down. So this is what one will look like once you have it done. You have the sprue here on top. This is just waste. And then you have the shaky head, or I keep saying shaky head, I'm sorry, it's over here. This is the finesse head, or the Ned Rig. And then you have the bait keeper here. And then you have a hook. So this thing is fairly hot still, so you want to wait a little longer to do this. I find it best to wait until they're totally cooled. But what you're going to want to do is you can take a pair of side cutters and get up in here and cut this thing off. You want to cut them off as close as you can. I'm going to leave a little bit of a point there. I then take a Dremel or a file and file that down flat before I powder paint them, which you'll see in just a second. I actually have a little piece of sandpaper on top of a tin lid that you guys will see there. So there it is. That's how to pour the Ned Rig, or the Ned head. So the last thing we're going to look at here, and again, it's all the same principle, guys. It's all the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the drop shot weight here, the mold here, and this is a again an FDS 8A. This goes from 1/32 ounce all the way to 5/8. I never pour anything smaller than a 1/4 ounce, 3/16 maybe. So that's the last 5. I'm going to go ahead and get these things warmed up. And I'm going to do this several times. That way I can get, I want to make sure that I can get a really nice pour, a really smooth pour. And you notice, even though that this thing is not heated up at all, still a fairly decent pour there. These are a little different. You don't need hooks for these, obviously. These are just weights. They have what's known as line locks. There's line lock swivels, actually. You can pick them up from Do It Molds. You can get them at Jan's Netcraft. You can pick them up at the tackle box. Is where I pick them up at. Amazon, you can pretty much get these things anywhere you want. The pointed section right here goes up out of the mold. And I'll show you here once I get these put in here. I'm going to do 3/16 to 5/8. Also, again, I didn't pour very much lead in here to warm this mold up, so it may not come out very, very smooth. They're just drop shot weights. I really don't care if they're like the most beautiful weights on the planet. They're going to do their job. And I don't powder paint these things, but you could do these the exact same way. I'm going to show you guys how to powder paint the the Ned Rig. You do the exact same purpose, exact same principle. Right, so there's the line locks in the mold. Make sure that you have those things in those little grooves. And then you pour them the exact same way. Very, very quick molding. They do dry very quick, or dry, I keep saying dry, I'm sorry. They do cool very quickly. They're extremely hot still, but they solidify quickly. That's the word I'm looking for. They solidify quickly. So there's 5 drop shot weights with the sprue on them as well. Same principle, guys. I'm not going to touch those because those are really, really hot. But you're going to take them. My favorite way is to hold on to them with some gloves and then actually twist the sprue off of these. I don't do that with the jig heads because if you grab a hold of it, I'm going to show you here really quickly what I'm going to talk about. You can actually grab a hold of this with some pliers and you can twist these. You just wiggle them back and forth and the sprue comes off really cleanly. There's no sanding or anything needed there. But what that does, lead is very, very soft and it causes the head to wiggle, which is not a huge deal, but it'll cause your keeper and everything to fall out. So just take some side cutters, cut them off, and I'll show you what to do to get that sprue off in the next step. So let's go to powder painting these things and I'll show you my setup for that. We're down in my basement right now. We're going to tackle powder painting these things, and what you need for this job is very, very simple. First and foremost, you're going to need some powder paint of your choosing. I choose ProTech powder paint. I get this at the tackle box. It's roughly $7 or $8 a jar of this. So this is green pumpkin here. We're going to be doing black today. So what I do is I take the lid off of this stuff. I have built a fluid bed here, nothing more than a few pieces of PVC that's hollow, obviously, in the inside. And at the bottom of this, there is one single piece of brown paper bag that you can get pretty much at any grocery store. That's screwed in there, and so there's an air chamber down here that fills up with air, and then it actually forces air through that brown paper bag and creates air that flows through this very, very evenly. I have right here, what this is just an aquarium pump. That is, I picked it up at Walmart. I think it was like less than $20. This is basically a regulator of sorts. Air regulator allows me to run multiple of them for one, but two, it allows me to change the air coming in or out of my fluid bed. So I'm going to put the tube on the external. Both of these are outlets on the pump, but I have it running into the air valve here, and then as I turn this left or right, it'll allow me to actually increase or decrease the flow of air to my fluid bed setup. So I want to I pour the entire jar in here because I just pour it back out. I have multiple of these, so different color. I don't leave them in here just for the simple fact is that they're easily spilt and this stuff goes everywhere. So let me try to get this thing dialed in and I'll grab the small camera and show you what your fluid bed should look like. If you see paint coming out of there, it is you got too much air going in there. So it's really tough to see in there, but what happens is with that air flowing around in there, it makes those particles of paint almost like they're floating in there because they're floating on air. It creates some air space in between those things, that paint particle. So when you dip your lure or your jig head down in there, what it does, it allows the paint particles to go around that as opposed to you compressing it or compacting the paint down there and using too much. So one of the things that you're going to need is some sort of heat gun or heat tool. My personal favorite is this little thing from Harbor Freight, Drill Master. Literally this thing is less, I think it's $7 at Harbor Freight still today, which is a great deal. I've used this thing forever. You're going to need some pliers. I'm just using these Craftsman wire stripping pliers for right now because that's all I have in my basement, but any kind of pliers will do. What you're going to do is you're going to be able to hold the lure or the jig heads with them, put them over the heat, dip them into the powder paint. But as I mentioned a second ago, to get this piece of lead there, that real sharp point, I'm gonna take, I just have this just candy tin with some DA sandpaper on there, some dual action sander, sticky sandpaper, and then I just take it, just getting that real rough surface off of there, and then I'll work my way through the rest of them. Again, some of these have already been done, some of these are just stuff that I've done today. So see there's another one. So I'm gonna work my way around on that. So what we're doing this for is, guys, so you don't cut your line in two. This thing is like a razor, it can be that sharp. So again, I'm just taking this DA sandpaper, getting that little point off of there. That one there's good. Make sure there's one more here. Grab the pliers. This again is to save your hand from the heat. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this thing on. This has 2 settings. I'm gonna turn on high. Guys, you're probably gonna hear this. It may, jack up the audio a little bit. So let's see what happens. So you're gonna hold this over the heat. Guys, you can literally cause this jig head to melt down in here, which is what you don't want to do, obviously. You want this jig head to be able to get hot enough so that the powder paint melts around it. I'm gonna show you 2 different versions. I'm gonna show you one that I feel like is correctly done, and I'm gonna show you one that I feel like that is not hot enough. So let's get started. I'm gonna let the heat gun warm up a little bit. Check my powder paint. It's actually there we go. So here we go. There's no way to tell to do this. You'll just get the feel of it. If it's too hot, the only thing you don't want it to do is actually melt the jig head. You want it to actually cause a little bit of smoke when it goes into the powder paint. And then once I figure it's hot enough, dip it straight into the paint, out, knock it off the sides. All right, so there, I feel like that jig head was not hot enough. It is very rough looking. Hopefully, it's very, very rough. I don't like the way that thing looks at all. That's the way I feel like the jig head did not get hot enough. So again, guys, this paint still is very, turn this off for a second. So this paint is not dry yet. What I have here is just a box that I stick the jig head in. That way the head doesn't touch anything. You do have to bake those to get those hard, but it is kind of a malleable substrate at this point. So let's try another one. I'm gonna try to get one so I am happy with it, and I'll show you the results. That was more like it. Give me a second, I'll show you the result. I'm gonna knock out some of these. So I'm gonna show you what will happen is if you don't have this fluid bed set up correctly. So if you don't have enough air coming through this thing, if you just have it compact, so I'm gonna turn this thing totally off. I'm gonna try to dip one of these small drop shot weights. Again, I usually don't dip drop shot weights. We're gonna do it just for the sake of showing you what the fluid bed does for you. So this is compacted down in here. There's no air in it now. I didn't dip it all the way in there enough, but you'll see there is a giant glob. Let's put it in this area here. There's a really giant glob of paint on there. There's too much paint on there. Does it really hurt anything? Probably not, but you're wasting paint. Doesn't look very good. So that's why you need the fluid bed there for that purpose. Let that dry out. So here's one of them that I felt like I had a really good, a very, very good coating on. All nice and black all around it, really nice and evenly coated. One thing you're going to notice is that on the jig heads, the eyes of the jigs actually are covered up with paint. So before you bake these jig heads, I have a small toaster oven that I hang them off the rack upside down, and I bake them for 15 minutes at 350 degrees. Before you do that, be sure you poke the paint out of the eyes of these things, because if you do not and you bake it in there, you're going to bake this paint and make it really hard. That's why you're baking it. It's basically a powder coating, guys, is what it is. So you have to bake it to set the paint. If you do not clean out that head or the eye, the line tie of the jig head, it is a bear to clean out. So make sure you, again, I take a toothpick, I have an eye buster tool, one of what looks like a little fingernail clippers, and I bust these eyes out before I bake them. Again, I just take them in a rack in a very small toaster oven that I have. I hang them off of the wire rack in there so they're not touching each other. If they touch each other, guys, while they're baking, they will actually fuse together. You break it apart and you're going to have no paint left there. So that is one thing to consider. So once you bake it for, again, I bake mine for 15 minutes at 350 degrees. You have a really, really nice powder coating on the head. Looks professional and absolutely catches fish. Here's some green pumpkin heads that I've done already. Again, so you can see that I've actually busted the eye out of this one, because if you don't, you're going to have a heck of a time getting those out. Even if you have a eye buster tool, sometimes it won't go through there, especially on these smaller jig heads. So all of these are done. There's one here that I intentionally left when I painted it. Here it is. So you can see here that the jig eye is totally covered over with paint. And in order to get that out of there, the only way I can figure to do it is I use an old hook, and I actually I just sacrifice a hook, and I take a hook and I bust those eyes out. It's really dangerous because you can hook yourself. You can also, you know, that hook is no good that you're using. So do yourself a favor, before you bake these, bust those eyes out with paint, bake them in a small toaster oven. I mean, you could do it in your real oven if you wanted to. Powder paint is some pretty nasty stuff. So, you know, put this stuff in a small toaster oven. They're really cheap. Bake it for 15 minutes at 350 degrees. Let them cool on their own. So turn the oven off. Let them cool down on their own in that oven. Don't open the door or anything. And then once they're cool, you're good to go fishing. You don't really have to bake them if you don't want to. However, it does make them extremely hard and a lot, they stand up to rocks and abuse a lot better. So bake them, 350 degrees, 15 minutes, and go out there and lean on them, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of On Another Line. And I hope this helps you out making your own jig heads or any other lure molds that you want to do, especially if you're pouring lead. Be safe, get out there and catch them. We'll see you next time on Another Line.